I learned what a layoff really sounds like the morning they erased my boss's entire team. Not the speeches, not the we're all family posts on the internet. The sound is quieter than that. It's the soft buzz of key cards failing at the turnstile. It's the dead pause after someone says, "Try it again," and the reader flashes red. It's the elevator doors closing again and again, while people stare at their phones like the floor might open and swallow them before security does. I'm a compliance analyst at a mid-sized payments company. We were the kind of place that loved words like agile and disruption and hated words like audit and retention. We moved money for online retailers, which meant we carried other people's risk for a living. The product teams got the praise. My group got the blame when anything went wrong. Maya ran our controls team. 6 of us. We were not glamorous. We wrote policies, tested access, reconciled exceptions, and built the boring checklists that kept regulators from tearing our throats out. When a client's lawyer wanted proof, Maya always had it. When an executive wanted to cut a corner, Maya always asked a question that made the room go cold. She wasn't loud, she didn't play politics, she was steady. That was the problem. 2 months earlier, we'd been acquired. New logo, new executives, new deadlines that felt like threats. There were whispers about synergies, but nothing concrete. Our old COO promised no layoffs. Our new VP smiled and said nothing. Then on a Tuesday, my phone lit up at 5:30 in the morning with a calendar invite titled Alignment Mandatory. 15 minutes, no agenda, no prep deck. It was sent to Maya and everyone on her team. Maya replied, all with one line: attend, listen, do not improvise. At 8:45, the 6th floor felt wrong. People were talking too softly. Managers who normally strutted were suddenly polite. HR was in early, carrying folders that looked too clean to contain anything human. Maya walked in like she always did, coffee in one hand, a notebook in the other, shoulders squared. She gave each of us a quick look, like she was taking inventory of the room. When her eyes met mine, she didn't smile. She didn't need to. At 9, we filed into the glass conference room. Across the table sat 3 executives I'd never met, an HR business partner named Lauren, and a security manager who kept his hands folded like he was in church. No one introduced themselves. No one asked how our week was going. The VP started talking about operational efficiency and flattening layers like he was reading weather. Then Lauren slid folders toward us, 1 to each person. Printed severance terms, a script, a list of return items, a paragraph about confidentiality, a paragraph about not an admission of wrongdoing. The usual corporate prayer. Maya didn't open hers. She listened, pen hovering over her notebook, like she was watching a magician's hands. Lauren got to the part where she said, "Your positions are being eliminated effective immediately." There was a collective inhale from my coworkers, Mike, who had a toddler, Elise, who was saving for a down payment, Omar, who'd just moved his parents in. Then the room went oddly calm, like the body shuts down feeling when the hit is too big. Security started standing behind chairs. Not aggressive, just present. The VP kept talking, but my brain locked onto one detail. Maya's phone screen face down on the table, vibrating in short bursts as her alerts died one by one. Single sign-on revoked. VPN token disabled. Laptop certificates invalidated. It was happening in real time. At 9:12, the conference room monitor blinked and refreshed. Maya's name disappeared from the directory in the corner, a ghosted icon where her profile picture had been. At 9:14, Lauren said, "We'll escort you to retrieve personal items." Maya finally opened her folder, not to read it, but to move it aside. She looked at the VP and asked one question, calm as breath. "Who is now the control owner for our quarterly attestations?" The VP's smile tightened. "That will be handled." Maya nodded once, like she'd just received the answers she expected. Then she looked at me. Not angry, not pleading, not panicked, just a tiny nod that said, "Stay upright and remember everything." Lauren turned to me last, hesitating like she'd lost her place in the script. "Grant," she said, "you're not included in this action." The VP leaned forward, finally learning my name. "Continuity," he said, as if the word explained the ethics. "You'll support transition for a short period." My coworkers stared at me with a mix of relief and betrayal that made my stomach burn. I wanted to say something noble. I wanted to stand up and walk out with them. But the truth is, in that room, bravery felt like a luxury item. I swallowed and asked, "How long is short?" The VP shrugged. "As long as we need." Maya stood. Security gave her space like she carried something sharp. She didn't hug anyone. She didn't make a scene. She leaned close enough that only I could hear her. "Do not sign anything you don't understand," she whispered. Then she stepped into the hallway and security walked her out first. I watched her enter the elevator with her hands empty, like she'd already accepted that anything she carried could be used against her. The doors closed, and the company swallowed her name. My badge still worked, my laptop still pinged, my emails still opened like nothing had happened. I stood there, still employed, surrounded by people being erased. And I realized something I'd never admitted out loud. They didn't leave me because I was valuable. They left me because I was useful. Before I even made it back to my desk, my calendar repopulated. A handoff meeting with the new VP. A knowledge transfer session with HR. A placeholder titled Control Remediation, owned by me. And sitting in my inbox was a forwarded email chain I wasn't supposed to see, stamped with the wrong recipient list. Subject line, Maya's group, complete wipe. That was when my phone buzzed again. One last message that had slipped through before the lockout fully caught. "They kept you. Be careful." By lunch, my old team was already a rumor. Their desks were cleared into plain boxes that looked identical, like the company was trying to pretend 6 people had been one mistake. Their names vanished from the org chart. Their JIRA tickets were reassigned to a generic queue called Legacy Cleanup. Even the shared drive folder we used for evidence, screenshots, approvals, sign-offs, had been renamed by someone with admin access. Archive. HR told everyone it was a restructure. Product leadership called it speed. In the hallway, engineers called it what it was, a purge. The new VP, Graham Hale, didn't invite me to grieve. He invited me to produce. He caught me before I could even sit down, standing in front of Maya's old area, like he owned the empty chairs. "Grant, right?" he said, hand out, smile practiced. "I want to start fresh. No drama. No lingering loyalty." He said loyalty like it was a flaw. "I'm just trying to do my job," I replied. "Perfect," he said, "because now your job is continuity." He walked me into his office. The view was nice, which meant the company wanted him to feel important. On the wall was a framed quote about accountability. It looked like something you buy when you want to borrow a reputation you haven't earned. He didn't sit behind his desk. He stood beside it, so the conversation felt casual. It wasn't. He slid a packet across the surface like it was a menu. "Transition acknowledgement," he said. "Standard. It assigns control ownership while we rebuild." I opened it and felt my throat tighten. It didn't assign me new work. It assigned me old responsibility. It stated that I accepted ownership of quarterly attestations for periods I didn't oversee. It said I confirmed the prior controls team's work was complete and accurate. It said I agreed to cooperate in any inquiry related to process failures under prior leadership. Maya's name wasn't on the page, but the target was obvious. "This is broader than a handoff," I said. Graham's smile held. "That's just legal language. It says I'm confirming work I didn't perform." "You're confirming that it exists," he said, leaning in slightly, "and that we can rely on it." I stared at the signature line for a long second. The company wanted my name under their version of history. If anything surfaced later, they'd point at me and say I signed. I set the packet down, careful like it could cut me. "I'll have legal review it," I said. "Then I'll respond." For the first time, his eyes sharpened. "That will slow things down?" "Then slow," I replied, "because my signature isn't a formality." He exhaled through his nose like he'd met resistance and was deciding whether it was worth crushing immediately. "All right," he said, voice smooth again. "While we wait, you'll do what Maya used to do, but we'll do it with less friction." He turned his screen toward me and started listing tasks like orders. Update the control narratives to match the new org structure. Recreate missing evidence for the quarter, because some folders were now restricted. Remove unhelpful language from Maya's notes, because auditors don't need opinions. And then he said the line he meant to sound reasonable. "You'll also need to disable access for the separated employees. Immediately. So there's no confusion." Not confusion. Exposure. I nodded like I was taking an assignment. Inside, something hardened. Back at my desk, I didn't start rewriting anything. I started reading. I opened our access request portal and pulled the audit trail for the last week. Who requested revocations? Who approved them? The timestamps. The justification fields. I wasn't hunting for drama, I was building a map. Graham's name appeared everywhere, but never at the final click. He recommended, HR executed, security enforced, finance validated. It was a chain designed to keep his hands clean. I exported the logs into the evidence vault, the system used for external audits. That vault mattered. Files placed there had automatic retention, immutable timestamps, and checksum verification. Deleting them required a documented approval trail that would show up later. Then I searched my email for phrases Maya hated. Just this once. Temporary override. We can fix the paperwork later. Dozens of hits. Executives asking for exceptions. Product leaders begging to skip approvals. Finance requesting access expansions with vague business justifications. And Maya, over and over, pushing back with calm questions that force people to either comply or put their shortcut in writing. I didn't forward anything to my personal account. I didn't print it. I didn't take a screenshot like a teenager planning a leak. I kept everything inside the company's own systems because evidence only matters if it survives scrutiny. At 3, HR booked me into a small room with one chair too many. Lauren sat across from me again. Same sympathetic face, same folder. "We just need you to sign a routine confidentiality reminder," she said. I flipped through it. Buried in the middle was a sentence that said, "I acknowledge performance concerns within the prior controls team." I looked up. There were no performance concerns. Lauren didn't blink. "It's standard language for consistency." Consistency? The same word Graham used when he wanted reality to fit paperwork. I slid the folder back. "I'll have legal review this as well." Her smile tightened. "Grant, this is how we do things." "And that's why we're in trouble," I said quietly. She glanced toward the door. I followed her eyes and saw the security manager standing outside, pretending he was checking his phone. Subtle, intimidating, plausible deniability. I stood. "I'm not refusing. I'm being careful." Back at my desk, a new ticket had appeared in my queue, created by Graham's assistant. Update monthly control attestation for prior period. Owner, Grant. The prior period included weeks when Maya ran the team. Weeks when Elise tested access. Weeks when Omar reconciled exceptions. They weren't asking me to work. They were asking me to sign my name under someone else's work while calling it mine. I opened the ticket and typed a single professional response. "Please confirm which executive is authorizing changes to historical control evidence and why. Also confirm legal has issued a litigation hold for the terminated team's work product." I copied internal audit because policy required it. 5 minutes passed. 10. No reply. Then at 4:18, Graham appeared behind my chair like he'd been waiting for the moment to remind me who owned oxygen in this building. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten me. He leaned in and spoke softly like advice. "Grant," he said, "you're not trying to make this harder than it is." I swiveled and met his eyes. "I'm trying to make it accurate." His smile didn't move, but his tone did. "Accuracy is flexible," he said, "when you understand the objective." For a second, I couldn't hear the office around me. That sentence swallowed everything. They hadn't kept me because I was safe. They kept me because I was the last person left who could make their story look clean. I nodded once, like I agreed. Understood, I said. I'll prioritize it. He walked away satisfied. I stared at my screen, then opened a blank document in the evidence vault and started writing a timeline of every request he'd made, with dates, systems, and names. Because at that point, I stopped wondering if this would turn into something big. I didn't know it yet, but that decision, documenting instead of obeying, was going to cost them everything. The next week, the building pretended nothing had happened. People still argued about lunch. Products still pushed updates at midnight, like the badge readers hadn't turned red for 6 people. Finance still sent cheerful spreadsheets about quarter close, while the empty desks in our corner stayed untouched, like the company was afraid a chair might file a complaint. Graham moved fast, and he moved sloppy. He installed a temporary lead from another department, a guy named Trevor, who had never sat through an external audit. Trevor was not a villain. He was just loyal to his paycheck, eager to please, and terrified of looking slow in front of executives. Graham liked him for the same reason he'd kept me. He could be used. Every morning, Graham ran a stand-up where he asked me for updates in front of Trevor and 2 product managers who didn't understand what controls were, but understood blame. "How's our posture?" Graham would say, like compliance was yoga. I learned to answer in a way that sounded productive without accepting ownership for lies. "We're assessing historical evidence gaps," I'd say. "We're documenting remediation steps." Graham would nod, satisfied, because to him, documentation was decoration. Then on a Wednesday, the email arrived that changed the temperature of the whole office. Our external auditors were expanding their sample pool for the quarter because the acquisition triggered additional testing. And on top of that, we received notice that a regulator exam team would be on site in less than a month. Graham called it a routine check. Maya would have called it a storm warning. He booked a meeting with finance, Trevor, and me. A deck was already on the screen when I walked in. Timeline, talking points, responsibilities. The word streamlined appeared so many times it stopped sounding like English. Graham pointed to a box labeled Control Owner Transition. "That's you," he said. "We need stability." Dennis from finance finally looked up from his laptop. Dennis wasn't loud either. He didn't need to be. He had the kind of authority that comes from controlling numbers. No one else knows how to read. "You're comfortable attesting to reserve reconciliation for the months under review?" Dennis asked. Reserve reconciliation meant the money we held back to cover chargebacks and refunds. It was sensitive. It was regulated. It was where mistakes turn into headlines. "I can attest to what I can verify," I said. Dennis frowned like I'd said something impolite. "We need clean answers," Graham smiled. "We will have clean answers." After the meeting, I went back to what was left of Maya's documentation. Most of her folders were locked now, but not all of them. Companies are rarely as tidy as they think. Some things were shared to the team at the project level, and someone had forgotten to remove my access before they hit the big red button on everyone else. I found a file Maya had created a few weeks before the acquisition closed. The title was boring on purpose: Vendor Settlement Variants. Inside were screenshots, emails, and reconciliation notes that made my skin go tight. A third-party vendor was netting transaction batches in a way that created timing gaps. At first, the gaps were small enough to be waved away as processing lag. But over time, the gaps grew. And the fix was always the same: manual journal entries made late at night to force the numbers to match. The approvals were always the same 2 names: Dennis and a controller who now reported directly into Graham's org. Maya had flagged it, not dramatically, not with accusations, just with the kind of careful language that says, "I'm about to save you from yourselves if you let me." She asked for an independent review. She recommended a pause on a product expansion until settlement controls were corrected. She noted that the pattern of late-night entries created audit exposure. The last entry in her notes was dated the Friday before the purge. Met resistance. Escalated to audit committee liaison. Follow-up next week. There was no follow-up. There was a wipe. I sat there staring at the screen until my eyes started to burn. Not from emotion, but from the sheer stupidity of what they'd done. They hadn't eliminated risk. They'd eliminated the people who could name it. And then the realization landed, heavy and clean. They didn't erase Maya's team because of efficiency. They erased Maya's team because she had found something that couldn't survive daylight. That night, I drove home and didn't turn on any noise. No television, no music, no scrolling. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote facts like I was building a raft. What I knew: Graham wanted historical evidence updated. Finance wanted clean attestations. Maya documented settlement variances, auditors and regulators were coming. What I didn't know: how large the variance had become, who else knew, and whether Maya's escalation reached anyone with power before they cut her off. I could have quit. It would have been the simplest move and it would have felt like control. But quitting would have left a vacuum where my signature could have been replaced by someone easier to bend. It would have left Maya's record to be framed as incompetence. And it would have left my old coworkers branded with performance concerns, because HR had decided a word was cheaper than the truth. So I did what Maya would have done if she still had access. I used the system against the story. Our company had a whistleblower hotline run by a third-party vendor. Most people treated it like a poster no one reads. Compliance people know it's a legal pipeline that creates a trail the company can't quietly erase. I wrote one report. Short, factual, no anger, no revenge fantasies. I referenced the vendor settlement, variance documentation, the late-night entries, the request to alter historical evidence, and the attempts to make me sign language that reclassified the terminations. I asked one question that mattered more than any accusation. Has a litigation hold been issued for the terminated controls team's work product and the vendor settlement variance? Then I submitted it and closed my laptop like I just pushed a piece of myself into a machine. The next morning, my calendar updated. Private meeting, internal audit. No agenda, no notes, just a room number. I walked there with my heart steady and my hands cold. The head of internal audit, Priya Desai, sat across from me with her laptop closed. Priya wasn't friendly and she wasn't hostile. She was precise, the kind of person who doesn't waste expression on things that can be proven. Grant, she said, I need you to answer carefully. I nodded. Has anyone asked you to change evidence after the fact? Yes. Has anyone asked you to describe terminations as performance when they were not performance-based? Yes. Did Maya document concerns about vendor settlement variance and late-night journal entry approvals? Yes. Priya opened her laptop and turned it slightly toward me. On the screen was my report, now stamped into an official case file with a tracking number and retention banner. Good, she said, because this is preserved. That single word hit harder than any promise. Preserved meant they couldn't pretend it never happened. Priya leaned forward. From this point forward, you do not take instruction from Graham on anything related to control evidence, attestations, or settlement variance. If he contacts you, you notify my team. Understood? Understood, I said. She held my gaze for a beat, then lowered her voice. They left you behind, she said, because you can either become their bridge or their fall guy. I walked out of that room and back into the normal noise of the office. But it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt like I'd stepped onto a stage where everyone was still acting, except now I could see the wires. By noon, I noticed the first change. Not a message, not a threat, just silence. The kind that means someone has realized you are no longer playing alone. Graham noticed the shift before anyone said his name out loud. It started small. My access requests sat pending instead of getting auto-approved. The evidence vault asked for an extra approver, someone in his org. My calendar got jammed with priority meetings that overlapped on purpose. Then he stopped pretending. He came to my desk mid-afternoon and dropped his voice like we were sharing a secret. "Audit's asking questions," he said. "Don't freelance your answers." "I'm not freelancing," I replied. "I'm following policy." He smiled, thin. "Policy is written by people who don't have to run a business." "And regulators are paid by people who do," I said. His eyes stayed warm, but his tone went flat. "Be smart, Grant." By the next morning, I got the first real hit. An automated message saying my password had been reset due to unusual activity. It wasn't unusual. It was a warning dressed as cybersecurity. I forwarded it to Priya's team and kept working. At 10, HR booked me into another quick sync. Same small room, same extra chair. Lauren was there, and this time she brought legal. Junior counsel, clean suit, careful eyes. Lauren slid a new document across the table. "Temporary reassignment," she said. "Operationally, you'll report into finance for the transition." Finance. Dennis. The same approvals Maya had flagged. I didn't touch the paper. Why is compliance being moved under finance during an active audit and exam window? Lauren's smile tightened. "It's about efficiency." "It's about control," I said. The junior counsel cleared his throat. "This is not punitive." "Then put in writing," I said, steady, "that this reassignment does not change my obligations to preserve evidence, cooperate with internal audit, and provide accurate statements to external auditors and regulators." Lauren looked at legal. Legal looked at the paper like it might bite him. "That's not standard," Lauren said, "and wiping an entire controls team before an exam isn't standard either," I replied. The door opened and Graham leaned in, casual like he'd just happened to be walking by. "Grant," he said softly, "you're making this dramatic." "I'm making it documented," I said. His smile froze for half a second. Then he recovered. "Sign the reassignment. It's just structure." I slid it back. "Not without the preservation language." Graham stared at me, then nodded once like he'd made a decision. "Fine," he said. "We'll revisit." When I walked out, my badge hesitated at the turnstile before it flashed green. A delay so small it could be denied. A delay so deliberate it couldn't be misunderstood. And then the silence hit, company-wide. Priya sent a preservation notice to all staff. Not a private message, not a quiet ping. A formal retention directive. All employees must retain records related to vendor settlement, reserve reconciliation, and control attestations. Do not delete or alter materials. Failure to comply may result in disciplinary action. It was polite language with teeth. Graham called me immediately. Not email, not chat. A phone call because calls don't leave paragraphs behind. "Did you report me?" he asked. "I reported facts," I said. "And I reported risk." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're going to burn your own career for people who are already gone." "They're not gone," I said. "They're just locked out." His voice dropped. "Your position is being reevaluated. Don't make yourself indispensable to a process you won't be part of." I ended the call, saved the timestamp, and sent it to Priya. That afternoon, external auditors requested an immediate walkthrough of reserve reconciliation and vendor settlement controls. They also asked for the prior control owner's documentation and termination rationale. The wording was careful. The meaning wasn't. Graham insisted on leading. He booked a conference room, brought a binder, and walked in smiling like charm could replace evidence. The next morning, the regulator exam team arrived earlier than planned. 2 auditors, a compliance specialist, and a lead examiner with the kind of calm that doesn't waste time. They set up in a glass room, asked for system access, asked for control narratives, asked for version history. Graham took the lead, of course. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and a story ready to sell. "We streamlined," he said. "We improved oversight. We reduced friction." The examiner listened, nodding occasionally, then turned his eyes to me. "Mr. Carter," he said, "are you the control owner for reserve reconciliation for the months under review?" Graham answered first. Grant is the owner now. The examiner didn't look at Graham. He looked at me. Were you the owner during those months? No, I said. The room tightened. Graham tried to smooth it. Grant is speaking to transition timing. The controls remain effective. The examiner nodded slowly. Then we will need the prior owner's work product, the access revocation log for the controls team, and the reason for the terminations. Also, he added, turning a page, we will need the support for the late-night journal entries used to close vendor settlement variances. Dennis from finance shifted in his chair like the air got heavier. Graham's smile held, but his eyes flicked toward me, a warning in silence. I kept my face neutral and my voice professional. The access revocation audit trail is preserved in our evidence vault under external audit retention, I said. I can provide it today. For prior owner documentation, internal audit holds the preservation directive and can coordinate. The examiner wrote that down. Then he asked the question Graham had been hoping to keep buried under buzzwords. Why was the entire controls team eliminated during an active quarter with expanded testing and a scheduled exam? Graham launched into his speech. Efficiency, redundancy, alignment. He said it like he'd practiced. The examiner listened, then turned to Priya, who had walked in quietly and taken a seat at the side of the room. Internal audit, he said. Did you review the decision to eliminate the controls team? Priya didn't blink. We are reviewing it now under an active case file. That was the first crack. Graham's jaw tightened. He tried to pivot. We are cooperating fully. Priya's tone stayed calm. Cooperation includes preserving records and preventing retroactive changes. Graham's smile finally slipped. By late afternoon, legal issued a formal litigation hold. External counsel was engaged. The external auditors requested a direct session with the audit committee. The regulators expanded their sample pool. Meetings started appearing on executive calendars like bad weather. The building went into controlled panic. Sudden friendliness, sudden quick clarifications, sudden requests to confirm what had been said weeks earlier. Graham tried one last move before the floor fully shifted. He sent an email to my manager's manager, copied to HR and finance, implying that documentation gaps existed because one remaining analyst failed to complete transition tasks. No names. But there was only one remaining analyst. He was building the blame ramp in real time. Priya forwarded that email back to the thread with one line. Please preserve. This will be reviewed as potential retaliation. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite from the board chair's office. Special session. Mandatory. Graham was on it too. When the call started, the board chair didn't waste time. Graham, step out of your office and have someone else present. We need to ensure preservation and non-interference. Graham laughed once like he thought it was theater. Of course. Then the general counsel spoke, measured and final. Graham, effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Your access will be suspended. Do not contact employees about this matter. There was a beat of silence. Then Graham's camera went dark. I didn't celebrate. I didn't breathe easier. I just sat there, staring at the blank square where his face had been, because I realized something that made my stomach drop in a new way. If Graham went down, he was going to try to drag someone with him, and I was the only person left inside his story who could still be framed as the cause. That night, my email inbox filled with automated notifications, policy holds, audit requests, regulator inquiries. At the bottom of the stack was one new message from HR. Subject, meeting, attendance required, no agenda, no context, just a time. And that was when I understood they weren't done trying to erase someone. They'd just changed the target. The HR meeting was scheduled for 8:30 in the morning, which is how you know it wasn't about my schedule. It was about control. When I walked in, the room wasn't just HR. Lauren sat at the table, but so did the general counsel, Priya, from internal audit, and an outside attorney I didn't recognize. There was also a second security manager by the door, hands folded, expression blank. That was the first moment I let myself believe I might not be the one getting erased. Lauren started with the same soft voice she used when she wanted paperwork to feel like kindness. "Grant, this is a fact-gathering meeting," she said. "We want to understand the sequence of events." The outside attorney slid a small recorder onto the table. "This is being documented," he said. "Answer carefully and truthfully." Priya looked at me once, steady, like a hand on the shoulder without touching. The general counsel opened a folder. Inside was a stack of printed emails, ticket screenshots, and access logs. Not mine, the company's. He didn't ask me to defend myself. He asked me to confirm details. "On the date of the controls team terminations," he said, "were you instructed to sign a transition acknowledgement that retroactively assigned you ownership of prior month attestations?" "Yes," I said. "Did you sign it?" "No." "Were you asked to adjust historical control narratives to match leadership's preferred description of the restructure?" "Yes." "Did you do it?" "No." "Did you preserve the access revocation logs inside the evidence vault?" "Yes." Then he turned one page and asked the question that mattered more than any of the others. "Did Mr. Hale tell you that accuracy was flexible when you understood the objective?" My throat tightened, not because I was scared, but because the line looked uglier in print than it sounded in his office. "Yes," I said. The outside attorney nodded and made a note like he'd been waiting for that specific sentence. Lauren's face tightened. She wasn't angry at me. She was angry that the script she'd been reading from had been copied into a file that could be read by people who didn't work for her. The general counsel looked at Priya. "Status?" Priya spoke without emotion, which is the tone you use when emotion might be weaponized later. "Evidence indicates intentional attempts to alter control records, mischaracterize termination rationale, and impede preservation. We also have indicators that vendor settlement variances were being masked by late-night manual journal entries, with insufficient independent review." Dennis from finance wasn't in the room, but his name might as well have been. The general counsel nodded once, then looked back at me. "Grant," he said, effective immediately, "you are instructed not to communicate with Mr. Hale. Your reporting line is temporarily reassigned to internal audit for purposes of the exam and remediation. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. He paused. "We also want you to know your position is not under review." I let that sentence land, not relief, just clarity. The meeting ended the way real corporate consequences begin, quietly, with instructions and a trail. Over the next 2 weeks, the company turned inside out. External counsel interviewed employees across finance, product, and security. The regulator exam team expanded scope and asked for deeper support around reserves. The external auditors requested a direct session with the audit committee. Graham's access stayed suspended. His email account went into legal hole. His calendar disappeared from view. His name remained on some systems for a while, because companies are slow at deleting people even when they're trying to. But the power behind the name was gone. Then Dennis resigned. Not announced, not celebrated, just a silent departure with an all-staff note that said he was pursuing new opportunities. The controller who approved the late-night entries was terminated for policy violations. Lauren from HR was reassigned and then removed from anything related to compliance decisions. And Maya's name came back, not to the org chart, but to the narrative. The audit committee insisted on reviewing the terminations as a governance issue. External counsel recommended remediation, including correcting internal documentation that described the wipe as performance-related. A month earlier, HR had tried to make me sign that language. Now, the company was paying lawyers to erase it. Maya was contacted through counsel. They offered a settlement and a non-disparagement agreement. She didn't accept the first draft. She negotiated like someone who understood that the words you sign become the version of you people remember. In the final agreement, the company reclassified the terminations as a reduction in force. They provided severance adjustments to match. They issued neutral references. They covered legal review for affected employees, and they committed, in writing, that no performance-based rationale would be attached to those files. When I heard that, it hit me harder than Graham's suspension, because it meant the people who were wiped out weren't just gone, they were restored. A few days later, Priya asked me to attend an audit committee session and present the remediation plan for controls ownership and reserve reconciliation. When I walked into that room, I expected hostility. I expected suspicion. Instead, I got something worse and better: fatigue. The board didn't want drama. They wanted the bleeding to stop. They asked me what needed to change. So I told them. Clear separation between finance and control attestation, independent review of settlement variances, system-enforced approvals for manual journal entries above a defined threshold, immutable retention for evidence vault files, with restricted deletion rights, a formal process that prevented leadership from retroactively changing control narratives without audit sign-off. It wasn't heroic, it was boring. And boring is what keeps companies alive. When the session ended, the board chair pulled me aside. "We'd like you to step into an interim controls lead role," he said. "We need stability." A month ago, I would have said yes without thinking, because stability sounds like safety. But I'd learned the difference. Stability can be a reward, or it can be a trap that makes you the face of someone else's cleanup. "I'll stay through remediation and transition," I said. "Then I'm leaving." He looked surprised. "Why?" Because I didn't want my career built on surviving their mess. Because I didn't want to become the person they point to later and say, "See, we fixed it," as if the fix was a person instead of a system. Because I'd watched how easily a company can erase good people when it's convenient. And I didn't want to forget that, so I did it clean. I wrote the remediation plan in plain language. I assigned owners. I built escalation paths. I documented every open issue and every resolution. I trained the incoming permanent lead, a woman with real risk experience, and a calm that didn't need performance. On my last day, I walked past the same turnstile where my coworkers' badges had flashed red. Mine still worked. That didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reminder. At my desk, there was no dramatic box, just a notebook, a pen, and a sticky note Maya had once left on my monitor, before she was locked out. "Truth survives paper," it said. I carried that note with me. Outside the building, the air felt different. Not lighter, just honest. But a week later, I met Maya for coffee. She looked tired, but not broken. More like someone who had set down a weight and decided not to pick it up again. "You did a hard thing," she said. "I did an accurate thing," I replied. She smiled once, the smallest real smile. We talked about systems and people and how organizations don't collapse from one big lie. They collapse from 1,000 small compromises, each one justified as temporary. When we stood to leave, she touched my arm briefly. "Next time," she said, "don't wait for permission to protect yourself." I nodded. "Next time, I won't." I started consulting 3 weeks later. Smaller clients, cleaner problems, companies that actually wanted controls to work, not just look good in a deck. And sometimes when a new executive tries to charm their way around a process, I hear Graham's voice in my head. Accuracy is flexible, and I remember what it cost. They wiped out her entire team, thinking they'd erase the risk. They left one employee behind, thinking he would keep the machine quiet. But I wasn't a bridge. I was a record. And once a record exists, it doesn't care who smiles in meetings. It just waits until the right people finally have to read it.